Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about descriptive study designs. The first descriptive study design I'd like to talk about is something that's a very different type of study design from everything else. It's called the ecological study design. And with this study design, the reason why it's different is we're not looking at individuals to measure things within an individual, but rather we're looking at the group level to better understand what happens within certain groups. And so what we do is we look at the occurrence of disease between different groups that have different levels of exposure. For example, we might look at certain disease levels within different countries. And so we're not looking at the specific individuals, but rather the group of individuals within that country. This is an example of an ecological study. It's comparing colon cancer incidence versus daily meat consumption in different countries. And what you can see from this is that in countries such as Japan, they have very low daily meat consumption amounts, and they also have very low colon cancer incidence rates. But if we look at the United States, which is higher up, the United States in general, on average, has a very high meat consumption and also has a very high colon cancer incidence. And so with this type of study design, we can look at overall rates within different countries or within different areas and better understand if there might be an association or a reason for further study. But one of the big problems with this study design is that sometimes people will try and make conclusions about individuals based on this type of group data. And this can lead to false conclusions, which is called ecologic fallacy. So the study design actually can have very large biases. It's a great place to start, but it can lead to a lot of bias. And so, for example, if we look at a class that has a really high biology scores, let's say they're the highest in the whole school district, we might assume that every student in that class has excellent biology scores. But that might not be true. There might be a few students in the class that have low biology scores, even if the majority of the class excels. And so with ecologic fallacy, we're making assumptions at the individual level sometimes, when actually the data were collected at the group level. And we really don't know if the people who, let's say, eat meat are really the ones who end up with the cancer. And so with ecologic studies, they're great to understand overviews, but we really need to do further studies on individuals to see if there truly is an association between the factors that we're measuring. On the computer, on the internet, you can find a lot of different comparative studies that are just very strange comparisons or relationships or associations that really have nothing to do with one another. Let me show you a few of those. In this, we see that the divorce rate in Maine correlates with the per capita consumption of margarine. Sorry. And so what we see is that as the divorce rates go down, the use of margarine also goes down. And as divorce rates go up, the use of margarine actually goes up. And so this is what can happen in ecological studies. We might be looking at two different factors that really have absolutely nothing to do with one another. Let me show you one more. In this, we see an inverse correlation. As honey is produced within bee colonies, as that is going down, we see that the juvenile arrests for possession of marijuana goes up. So I really doubt that there's anything that causes there to be a correlation between honey production with bees and juvenile arrest for pot. But if we look hard enough, we sometimes see patterns and things that there's no correlation. And so again, ecologic studies have this potential for bias, for significant bias, that we really have to be aware of. Other descriptive studies can be found at the base of this hierarchy of evidence pyramid. With this pyramid, which we'll be showing you a few times this semester, what we're looking at is the weakest evidence is at the bottom of this pyramid and the strongest evidence is at the top. So if we're going to start at the bottom and we're looking at descriptive type studies, of course there's expert opinion or editorials, but there's also case series and case reports. So let's talk about those. A case report is something that happens with a clinician in the field. A patient might come in and have something unique or interesting, or perhaps something went wrong with the treatment, or maybe they have some sort of odd presentation that's very unusual. There's lots of different things that can happen in clinical practice that the clinician feels maybe this is something that others need to know about, and they therefore report it in research journals. And so a case report really is just a single case that is documented by a practitioner. Here's a British Medical Journal case report that is somewhat recent. This is looking at eye injuries in the extreme environment ultra marathon runner. And what this article is talking about is that this single case, an ultramarathon runner, which is not very common to do that activity, has many eye problems because of the extreme outdoors that this individual runs in, that the individual runner runs in very extreme conditions where it might be very cold, which causes the tears to crystallize, which can scratch the eye. And so here's a case report where we really wouldn't need to do further research on this, but this is something that the clinician felt was interesting and important to get the information out there for other clinicians in the field. So in this case, the case report was written because it was very unique and original. But there's also case reports that are written where more research is potentially needed. For example, in this study, a certain technique or treatment called shortwave therapy was utilized for pneumothorax. This is a condition where the lungs are collapsing. And what this group of individuals, clinicians, found was that when they used this therapy for pneumothorax, they found that the lungs were starting to reinflate and that they were able to pull out the excess air that is falling outside of the lung. And so they suggested that really large-scale clinical trials are needed in order to see, is this truly something that's effective for other individuals? And so with case reports, we can see that they can be utilized for many different reasons. Clinicians see very interesting cases out there in clinical practice, and without sharing it through case reports, the researchers never will really know what's happening in clinical practice. And so case reports are at the bottom of our pyramid of hierarchy, but they're the widest because there's a lot of cool case reports out there. And what happens is researchers then will try and build on that. They'll see something that's interesting and they'll say, we really should study this. And so it kind of builds up the pyramid. Now there's also something called case series. A case series is very similar to a case report, but it's when a clinician sees multiple patients who have the similar outcomes, or they have the similar treatment, or somehow they're similar in nature. And so it's not just one case that something happened to, but multiple cases. And so a case series is technically stronger than a case report, because a case report is only one individual, but it's still a very low level of evidence. Sometimes case reports can lead to very big things. For example, if we look at this was released in 1982. And if you think back to 1982, looking at homosexual male residents, as it says in this title, And they had all of these very strange immunological disorders. And this was a case series. An astute clinician wrote, something's going on. I'm seeing these gay men coming into my clinic, and they have these odd presentations. Something's going on. Can anyone guess what this was the start of? This was the start of the AIDS epidemic. And so sometimes clinicians will find new diseases. And again, it's important for clinicians to speak up because it's something that other clinicians in the field and researchers need to know about. More recently, one of the new outbreaks that has been happening is the Zika virus transmission. And in this very recent article, happening in September of 2016, researchers recently wrote about transmission of Zika virus by platelet transfusion. There's a lot we don't know about Zika, and so by clinicians in the field writing about it, it's things that other clinicians can learn. And researchers can, kind of pick up and run with and take a look at it and see if it truly is something that has occurred. And so in this case series, there were only 2 patients, but because it's more than one, it's not just a case report, it's now a case series. So with case reports and case series, they are considered low level of evidence. We really can't generalize the findings to a larger population. In other words, what happens with one individual might not happen with anyone else. It might just be a fluke, or perhaps the clinician was biased in the way that he or she wrote the article. Case reports and case series don't identify cause and effect relationships. We really don't know if the way that it's described is truly the way that things happened. And so we don't know that this occurrence happened first, and then the disease showed up, and then here's how they, presented. It's something that we need to look at a bigger level, a large-scale level. Case reports also don't account for natural history. And so sometimes in case reports, it looks like, and a miracle happened with this treatment I used, and they got better. But really, with natural history, maybe they got better anyways, even without the treatment. And so we have to really keep that in mind, and in future studies have control groups that have no other treatment to see would patients get better anyway. And finally, it doesn't really provide strong evidence compared to other research methods. But again, sometimes case reports are the only evidence that are out there on a given topic, and so they can be very important. So please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.